In the scorching heat of a military training facility in Fort Benning, Georgia, where the sun beats down mercilessly on concrete and steel, a story unfolded that would challenge everything the military establishment thought they knew about precision shooting and respect. This isn't just another tale of military prowess. It's a story about a woman who refused to be underestimated, a general who learned humility the hard way, and 13 perfect shots that echoed far beyond the shooting range. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The year was 2019, and Staff Sergeant Maria Vasquez had just been assigned to the elite sniper training program at Fort Benning. At 28 years old, she stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, with calloused hands that spoke of years handling weapons with the precision of a surgeon and the confidence of someone who had earned every stripe on her uniform through blood, sweat, and countless hours on shooting ranges across 3 different military bases. Her background wasn't typical for someone in her position. She had grown up in rural Montana, where her grandfather, a World War II veteran, had taught her to shoot tin cans off fence posts before she was tall enough to see over the kitchen counter. Maria's journey to this moment had been anything but conventional. She had enlisted 8 years earlier, not because of some grand patriotic calling, but because her family's ranch was failing, and the military offered stability and a chance to use skills she had been developing since childhood. Her first posting had been in communications, but her exceptional marksmanship scores during basic training had caught the attention of her commanding officers. Within 2 years, she had transitioned to combat roles, serving 2 tours in Afghanistan, where her ability with a rifle had saved lives and earned her commendations that most soldiers only dream about. The Barrett M82A1 rifle she carried wasn't just any weapon. It was a 50 caliber anti-material rifle that weighed nearly 30 pounds and could accurately engage targets at distances exceeding a mile. Most soldiers struggled just to carry the weapon effectively, let alone shoot it with any degree of accuracy. The recoil alone was enough to bruise ribs and dislocate shoulders if not handled properly. But Maria had spent months learning to work with this mechanical beast, understanding its temperament like a cowboy understands his horse. On this particular Tuesday morning, the Advanced Marksmanship Course was hosting a visit from Brigadier General Robert Hawthorne, a career military officer who had climbed the ranks through a combination of political savvy and old-school military thinking. At 55, he represented a generation of military leadership that still questioned whether women belonged in combat roles, despite official policy changes. His salt and pepper mustache and stern demeanor made him appear exactly like what central casting would order for a military general, and his reputation for being tough but fair was well known throughout the base. General Hawthorne had arrived that morning with his aide-de-camp and a small entourage of junior officers, ostensibly to observe training procedures and assess the effectiveness of the integrated training programs. But those who knew him understood that he was really there to find evidence to support his belief that mixing men and women in combat training was lowering overall military effectiveness. He had been vocal in closed-door meetings about his concerns that standards were being lowered to accommodate female soldiers, and this visit was his opportunity to gather ammunition for his arguments. The shooting range that morning was a hive of activity. 12 soldiers, including Maria, were participating in the advanced precision shooting exercise. The targets were positioned at various distances, some at 800 yards, others at over 1,000 yards, with a few challenge targets placed at nearly 1,500 yards. These weren't simple bullseye targets either. They were designed to simulate real-world scenarios with varying wind conditions, elevation changes, and obstacles that required shooters to demonstrate not just accuracy, but tactical thinking and adaptability. Maria had arrived early, as was her habit, to inspect her equipment and run through her pre-shooting routine. She methodically cleaned her rifle's barrel, checked the scope mounting, and verified that her ammunition was properly seated. This wasn't just perfectionism.
It was survival instinct, honed through combat experience, where a single miscalculation could mean the difference between completing a mission and not coming home at all. As the other soldiers prepared their equipment, Maria noticed the general's group approaching the firing line. She had heard about General Hawthorne's reputation and his skeptical views about women in combat roles, but she had learned long ago that the best response to doubt was consistent, excellent performance. She had no intention of engaging in any kind of confrontation. Her plan was simple: complete the exercise with her usual precision and professionalism, then move on to the next training requirement. The morning air was still, with only a light breeze coming from the southwest. Ideal conditions for precision shooting. Maria had already calculated the atmospheric conditions, noting the temperature at 78 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity at 42%, and barometric pressure holding steady. These might seem like minor details to an outside observer, but for a precision shooter, they were critical variables that could affect bullet trajectory over long distances.
As the soldiers lined up for the exercise briefing, Major Thompson, the range officer, began explaining the day's challenges. The exercise was designed to test not just shooting accuracy, but also the ability to perform under pressure and adapt to changing conditions. Each shooter would engage 13 targets in a specific sequence, with varying distances and difficulties. The targets included standard paper targets, reactive metal targets that would indicate hits with audible feedback, and several specialty targets designed to simulate real-world scenarios. General Hawthorne positioned himself behind the firing line, where he could observe each shooter's performance. His aide was taking notes, and Maria could feel the weight of his scrutiny as his gaze swept across the line of soldiers. She had experienced this kind of evaluation before, the subtle but unmistakable sense that she was being measured against different standards than her male counterparts, that any mistake would be magnified and any success would be minimized. The first shooter was Sergeant Rodriguez, a 24-year-old marksman from Texas who had consistently scored in the top 10% of his class. He approached his Barrett rifle with confidence, settled into his shooting position, and began engaging targets. His performance was solid: 10 hits out of 13 attempts, with 2 near misses and 1 clear miss due to a wind calculation error. The general nodded approvingly and made a comment to his aide about the quality of training. Next was Corporal Jenkins, followed by Staff Sergeant Williams, then Private First Class Chen. Each shooter demonstrated competent skills, with hit rates ranging from 7 to 11 targets out of 13. The general seemed satisfied with the overall performance level, occasionally asking Major Thompson questions about training methodologies and ammunition expenditure rates. When it was Maria's turn, she approached the firing line with the same calm demeanor she had maintained throughout the morning. She positioned her Barrett rifle on its bipod, adjusted the scope settings for the first target, and began her breathing routine. The first target was positioned at 600 yards, a warm-up distance for someone of her capabilities. She squeezed the trigger with the same controlled pressure she had perfected over thousands of rounds, and the bullet struck dead center. The second target at 800 yards fell just as easily, then the third at 900 yards. As Maria continued through the sequence, something remarkable was happening. She wasn't just hitting the targets, she was consistently placing shots in the precise center of each target zone. The distinctive crack of the Barrett rifle echoed across the range with mechanical precision, followed by the satisfying ping of metal targets confirming perfect hits. General Hawthorne's expression began to change as he watched through his binoculars. The casual confidence he had displayed while observing the male shooters was gradually being replaced by intense focus and what might have been surprise. By the time Maria had successfully engaged her 8th consecutive target, he was standing directly behind her position, studying her technique with the concentrated attention of someone witnessing something unexpected. Maria was completely absorbed in her shooting sequence, blocking out everything except the technical requirements of each shot. Target 9 was positioned at 1,200 yards with a slight crosswind. She made a quick adjustment to her scope and sent another perfect shot downrange. Target 10 was an angled shot that required compensation for the slope of the terrain. Another perfect hit. The pattern continued with mathematical precision. Target 11, perfect hit. Target 12, dead center. The final target represented the ultimate challenge of the exercise, a reactive metal target positioned at 1,400 yards, partially obscured by artificial obstacles designed to simulate battlefield conditions. This was the shot that typically separated the exceptional shooters from the merely competent ones. Many of the previous shooters had either missed this target entirely or achieved only marginal hits that barely qualified as successful engagements. Maria took extra time calculating this final shot. She considered the distance, the wind conditions that had shifted slightly over the past 20 minutes, the angle of the sun, and the known characteristics of her rifle at extreme distances. She adjusted her position slightly, regulated her breathing, and found that perfect moment of stillness that every precision shooter recognizes, the moment when everything aligns and the shot becomes inevitable. The Barrett rifle's massive report echoed across the range one final time, and after what seemed like an eternity, the distant ping of the metal target confirmed what everyone watching already knew: another perfect hit. 13 targets, 13 perfect shots. In the precision shooting community, this kind of performance was legendary, the type of shooting that gets discussed for years afterwards and becomes the standard by which other performances are measured. As Maria began to clear her rifle and secure her equipment, the stunned silence on the firing line was broken by spontaneous applause from the other soldiers. Even the most competitive among them recognized that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. But the person whose reaction would prove most significant was General Hawthorne, whose expression had shifted from skeptical observation to something approaching disbelief. What happened next would become the subject of investigation reports, witness statements, and heated discussions in Pentagon conference rooms for months to come. General Hawthorne, perhaps driven by disbelief at what he had just witnessed, or maybe by a deep-seated need to prove that such performance was somehow the result of equipment advantages rather than skill, made a decision that would alter the trajectory of his military career and create a story that would spread throughout military circles worldwide. "Soldier," the general called out as Maria was packing her equipment, "I want to examine that rifle." Maria looked up, somewhat surprised by the direct request. "Of course, sir," she responded, standing at attention. "The weapon is cleared and safe for inspection." But instead of the routine inspection she expected, General Hawthorne walked directly to her shooting position and, without asking permission or following standard protocol for equipment handling, reached down and began to lift the Barrett rifle from its position. What he hadn't considered was that the Barrett M82A1, while an incredibly effective weapon, requires specific handling techniques due to its size, weight, and mechanical complexity. "Sir," Maria said, stepping forward with professional courtesy but clear concern, "if you'd like to examine the rifle, I'd be happy to demonstrate the proper handling procedures. The Barrett has some unique characteristics that—" "I've been handling weapons since before you were born, soldier," the general interrupted, his tone carrying the sharp edge of authority mixed with what might have been wounded pride. "I think I can manage to look at a rifle." What the general failed to appreciate was that Maria's offer of assistance wasn't based on any assumption about his general weapon handling capabilities, but on specific knowledge about the Barrett system that could only be gained through extensive hand-on experience. The Barrett M82A1 has several mechanical features that can trap fingers or cause injury if not properly understood. The reciprocating barrel system, the massive bolt mechanism, and the complex muzzle brake system all require specific knowledge to handle safely. As General Hawthorne lifted the rifle, attempting to examine the scope mounting system while the weapon was still partially assembled, his hand slipped on the smooth metal surface. The 30-pound rifle began to fall, and in his attempt to catch it, he twisted his wrist and arm in an unnatural position while simultaneously trying to prevent the expensive optics from hitting the concrete. The physics of the situation were unforgiving. A 30-pound object falling from chest height, combined with an awkward catching motion and the general's determination not to let the rifle hit the ground, created a perfect storm of biomechanical stress. His attempt to save the equipment resulted in his arm being twisted beyond its normal range of motion, and the audible snap that followed left no doubt that something significant had broken. Maria reacted with the speed and precision that had made her an exceptional soldier. In one fluid motion, she caught the falling Barrett rifle with one hand while simultaneously supporting the general's injured arm with the other, preventing further damage and ensuring that the weapon didn't discharge or suffer damage that could make it dangerous for future use. "Medic," she called out immediately, her training taking over, as she assessed the situation. "We need medical assistance at the firing line." Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to emergency situations, cutting through the shocked silence that had fallen over the range. General Hawthorne's face had gone pale, and sweat was beginning to form on his forehead as the initial shock wore off and the pain began to register. "I'm fine," he said through gritted teeth, though his injured arm was clearly anything but fine. "Just help me sit down." Maria guided him to a nearby bench, carefully supporting his weight while ensuring that his injured arm remained as stable as possible. Her movements were gentle but confident. This wasn't the first time she had provided emergency medical assistance, and her combat experience had taught her how to remain calm and effective even when dealing with serious injuries. "Sir, please try to keep your arm as still as possible," she instructed, her voice professional but caring. "The medics will be here in just a moment, and they'll be able to properly assess and treat the injury." As they waited for medical assistance, Maria couldn't help but notice the irony of the situation. The general who had come to observe and potentially criticize the capabilities of female soldiers in combat roles was now dependent on those very capabilities for immediate medical assistance. But there was no satisfaction in this observation. Maria was a professional soldier, and her concern was entirely focused on ensuring that her commanding officer received appropriate care. The base medics arrived within minutes, their response time reflecting the high priority given to any incident involving general officers. As they began their assessment and treatment, Maria remained nearby to answer questions about exactly what had happened and to provide any assistance that might be needed. The medical evaluation confirmed what everyone already suspected. General Hawthorne had suffered a complete fracture of his radius, along with possible ligament damage in his wrist. He would require immediate transport to the base hospital for x-rays, surgery, and what would likely be months of rehabilitation. The aftermath of the incident began immediately, even as the general was being transported to the medical facility. Major Thompson, as the range officer in charge, was required to file an immediate incident report, and within hours, the chain of command was buzzing with phone calls and urgent meetings. What had started as a routine training observation had transformed into a complex situation involving a general officer's injury, questions about equipment safety protocols, and the kind of bureaucratic investigation that could consume weeks of official time and attention. But while the administrative machinery began grinding into motion, something even more significant was happening in the wider military community. The story of Maria's perfect 13-shot performance, followed by her immediate and professional response to the general's injury, began spreading through the informal networks that connect soldiers across different units and bases. In mess halls, barracks, and training facilities, the story was being told and retold, with each version adding new details and perspectives. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had witnessed the entire sequence of events, found himself fielding questions from soldiers throughout the base. "I've been shooting competitively for 8 years," he told anyone who would listen, "and I've never seen anything like what Staff Sergeant Vasquez did out there. 13 perfect shots with a Barrett? That's not luck. That's not equipment. That's pure skill developed over years of dedicated practice." The medical report on General Hawthorne's injury added another layer of complexity to the situation. The attending physician, Dr. Captain Sarah Mitchell, noted in her report that the fracture pattern was consistent with an accidental fall involving a heavy object, and that Staff Sergeant Vasquez's immediate response had likely prevented additional injury to the general's shoulder and potentially his back. Her quick thinking and proper first aid technique had demonstrated exactly the kind of combat readiness and adaptability that the military trained soldiers to develop. Meanwhile, Maria found herself in the uncomfortable position of being the center of attention for reasons she'd never intended. Her approach to the situation was characteristically straightforward. She filed her incident report with precise, factual details, cooperated fully with the investigation, and attempted to return to her normal training routine as quickly as possible. But the military bureaucracy had other plans. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander, requested a meeting with Maria within 48 hours of the incident. Colonel Hayes was a respected officer who had navigated her own path through a military culture that hadn't always been welcoming to women in leadership positions. She understood the delicate dynamics at play in this situation and recognized that how it was handled would have implications far beyond the immediate participants. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, Colonel Hayes began as Maria reported to her office, I want to understand exactly what happened out there, in your own words, without the formal language of incident reports. Maria recounted the events with the same precision she brought to her shooting, emphasizing the general's clear authority to examine the equipment and her own attempts to provide assistance based purely on technical knowledge of the Barrett system. She made no attempt to assign blame or suggest that the incident could have been prevented, focusing instead on the factual sequence of events. The Barrett M82A1 is a specialized weapon system. Even experienced shooters need familiarization training before handling it safely. I wasn't questioning the general's overall competence. I was trying to prevent exactly the kind of accident that unfortunately occurred. Colonel Hayes nodded thoughtfully. She had already reviewed Maria's service record and was impressed not just by her shooting performance, by her consistent professionalism and her record of helping train other soldiers. This incident, while unfortunate, was revealing character traits that the military valued: competence under pressure, immediate response to emergencies, and loyalty to fellow service members regardless of rank. The investigation itself was thorough, but ultimately straightforward. Multiple witnesses confirmed that Maria had attempted to provide assistance with equipment handling, that the general had declined this assistance, and that the injury was clearly accidental. More importantly, everyone agreed that Maria's immediate response had demonstrated exactly the kind of medical training and situational awareness that exemplified military professionalism at its best. But the real story was still unfolding in the broader military community. Videos of Maria's shooting performance, recorded as part of the routine training documentation, were being shared through official channels for training purposes. Marksmanship instructors at other bases were using her performance as an example of what was possible with proper training and dedication. The 13 perfect shots were becoming a standard of excellence that inspired other soldiers to push their own capabilities. General Hawthorne, meanwhile, was facing his own reckoning with the events at the range. During his recovery, he had time to reflect on what had happened and what it revealed about his own assumptions and biases. The medical staff treating him couldn't help but praise Maria's immediate response and professional medical assistance, noting that her actions had likely saved him from much more serious injury. Dr. Mitchell, during one of the general's follow-up appointments, made a comment that would stick with him throughout his recovery. "General, I've treated a lot of training accidents over the years. Most of them could have been prevented with better communication and respect for technical expertise, regardless of who has that expertise. Staff Sergeant Vasquez tried to help you avoid this injury, and when it happened anyway, she responded like the combat-tested professional she obviously is."
Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you were enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. 3 weeks after the incident, as General Hawthorne continued his rehabilitation with a cast extending from his wrist to his elbow, he made a decision that would surprise many of his colleagues and superiors. He requested a meeting with Maria, not through official channels or as part of any investigation, but as a personal conversation between two soldiers who had shared an experience that had affected both of them profoundly. The meeting took place in Colonel Hayes' office, with the colonel present as both a witness and a facilitator. Maria entered with the same professional demeanor she had maintained throughout the entire situation, showing no signs of resentment or satisfaction at the general's obvious discomfort with his injury. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, General Hawthorne began, his voice notably different from the authoritative tone he had used on the range. I want to apologize to you, both for my behavior that day and for my failure to listen when you tried to help prevent this accident. Maria's response was immediate and gracious. Sir, no apology is necessary. Accidents happen during training, and the important thing is that we all learn from them and continue to improve our procedures. But the general wasn't finished. No, soldier, an apology is necessary, and it's not just about the accident. I came to that range with preconceptions about the capabilities of female soldiers in combat roles. Your performance that day, both your shooting and your immediate response to my injury, forced me to confront those preconceptions and recognize how wrong I was. What followed was a conversation that would influence military policy discussions for years to come. General Hawthorne admitted that his skepticism about integrated training and women in combat roles had been based more on tradition and assumption than on actual evidence or experience. Maria's perfect shooting performance, combined with her professional response to his injury, had provided compelling evidence that competence and dedication were more important factors than gender in determining military effectiveness. Colonel Hayes, who had been quietly observing this exchange, recognized its significance. Here was a general officer, someone whose opinions influenced policy at the highest levels, acknowledging that his views had been changed by direct experience with exceptional performance. This wasn't just personal growth, it was the kind of testimony that could influence broader military culture and policy. Over the following weeks, as General Hawthorne continued his recovery, he began incorporating his experience into his official duties and policy discussions. In meetings with other senior officers, he found himself defending integrated training programs and using Maria's example to illustrate the importance of evaluating soldiers based on individual merit rather than group stereotypes. Meanwhile, Maria's reputation was spreading far beyond Fort Benning. Her 13 perfect shots had become something of a legend in military shooting circles, but equally impressive to her peers was her professional handling of the entire situation. She had demonstrated not just exceptional shooting skills, but the kind of character and professionalism that the military sought to cultivate in all its personnel. The Barrett rifle itself became part of the story's mythology. The specific weapon that Maria had used for her perfect shooting performance was designated for special use in advanced training programs, and her shooting technique was analyzed and incorporated into updated training materials. Marksmanship instructors began using video analysis of her shooting form to teach proper Barrett handling techniques, and her methodical approach to calculating long-distance shots became a model for other precision shooters. But perhaps the most significant impact was on military culture more broadly. The story of the general and the staff sergeant became a case study in leadership schools, illustrating how preconceptions could blind even experienced leaders to the capabilities of their subordinates, and how true leadership required the humility to acknowledge mistakes and learn from them. Maria herself remained characteristically focused on her duties and continued development as a soldier. She was selected for additional advanced training programs and was eventually assigned to instructor roles where she could share her expertise with other developing marksmen. Her approach to teaching emphasized the same methodical preparation and technical precision that had made her shooting performance legendary. The incident also led to updates in equipment handling protocols across the military. New procedures were implemented requiring that soldiers with specialized equipment expertise be consulted before unfamiliar personnel handled complex weapon systems, regardless of rank differences. These technical expertise protocols acknowledged that knowledge and experience with specific systems could be more important than general military experience when it came to safety and effective use of specialized equipment. General Hawthorne's recovery was complete within 4 months, and he returned to full duty with a new perspective on leadership and a deeper understanding of the capabilities of the soldiers under his command. His experience became a powerful tool for promoting cultural change within the military, as he was able to speak from personal experience about the value of diversity and the dangers of assumption-based leadership.
The story also had implications for military families and recruitment. Parents who had been concerned about their daughters joining the military began to see stories like Maria's as evidence that the military could provide opportunities for women to excel in previously male-dominated fields. Recruitment officers found that Maria's story resonated particularly well with young women who were considering military careers but weren't sure whether they would be given fair opportunities to demonstrate their capabilities.
6 months after the incident that would define both their careers, General Hawthorne found himself in a Pentagon briefing room, addressing a gathering of senior military leaders about the integration of women into combat roles. The meeting had been scheduled months earlier as part of ongoing policy reviews, but the general's presentation would be informed by his personal experience in ways that none of the attendees expected. "Gentlemen and ladies," he began, looking around the room at colonels and generals whose opinions would shape military policy for years to come. "I want to tell you about a day when I learned more about military effectiveness and leadership than I had in the previous 5 years combined." As he recounted the story of Maria's shooting performance and his own injury, the room fell silent. These were officers who had heard countless briefings about training statistics and integration policies, but hearing a respected general officer describe how his own assumptions had been challenged by direct experience carried a different weight entirely. Staff Sergeant Vasquez didn't just demonstrate exceptional marksmanship that day, General Hawthorne continued. She demonstrated the kind of situational awareness, technical expertise, and immediate response capability that we train all our soldiers to develop. The fact that she happens to be a woman became irrelevant in the face of her obvious competence and professionalism. The presentation included video analysis of Maria's shooting performance, which had become a teaching tool used in marksmanship programs across multiple military branches. The mathematical precision of her shots, the consistency of her technique, and the methodical approach to each target engagement illustrated training principles that applied regardless of the shooter's gender. But perhaps most importantly, General Hawthorne addressed the cultural implications of what had happened. I realized that my skepticism about women in combat roles wasn't protecting military effectiveness, it was potentially limiting it by creating barriers that prevented exceptional soldiers from contributing their full capabilities to our mission. Back at Fort Benning, Maria had been promoted to Sergeant First Class and was now serving as a senior instructor in the Advanced Marksmanship program. Her classes were consistently oversubscribed, with soldiers requesting transfer to Fort Benning specifically to train under her guidance. Her teaching method combined technical precision with practical wisdom gained from combat experience, and her students were achieving performance levels that exceeded previous program standards. One of her students, Private Jennifer Walsh from California, had initially struggled with the Barrett rifle system. "Sergeant Vasquez doesn't just teach you how to shoot," Private Walsh explained to her family in a letter home. "She teaches you how to think about shooting, how to analyze conditions, calculate variables, and maintain consistency under pressure. It's like taking a master class in applied physics and psychology at the same time." Maria's influence extended beyond individual training as well. She had been asked to contribute to updates of the Army's marksmanship manuals, incorporating lessons learned from her combat experience and her work with advanced weapon systems. Her technical knowledge of the Barrett rifle system had become a consultant for equipment manufacturers looking to improve weapon design and user interfaces. The story of her perfect 13 shots had also reached international military communities. Allied forces conducting joint training exercises specifically requested opportunities to observe her training methods, and several NATO countries had incorporated her shooting techniques into their own sniper training programs. The incident that had started as a routine training exercise had evolved into a case study in military excellence that was influencing training programs around the world. General Hawthorne's own career had taken an unexpected turn as well. His candid acknowledgement of his initial biases and his advocacy for merit-based evaluation of military personnel had earned him respect from superiors who valued leaders capable of growth and adaptation.
He was selected for additional responsibilities overseeing integration programs and became a powerful voice for cultural change within the military hierarchy. The relationship between Maria and General Hawthorne had evolved into one of mutual professional respect. They occasionally corresponded about training programs and policy issues, with the general seeking her input on technical matters and practical implementation of new procedures. Their professional relationship had become a model for how the military could benefit from expertise and experience regardless of rank or background. The Barrett rifle that had been at the center of their story had been retired from active training use and was displayed in the Fort Benning Museum, along with a detailed account of Maria's shooting performance and the lessons learned from the incident. Visitors to the museum, including civilian families and military personnel from around the world, could read about how 13 perfect shots helped change military culture and demonstrated the importance of evaluating people based on their individual capabilities rather than group stereotypes. The impact on other female soldiers throughout the military had been profound and lasting. Maria's story had become an inspiration for women serving in all branches of the military, demonstrating that excellence and professionalism could overcome even deeply rooted biases and assumptions. Her example encouraged other women to pursue advanced training opportunities and to persist in the face of skepticism or doubt about their capabilities. More broadly, the incident had contributed to ongoing cultural changes within the military that emphasize merit-based evaluation and the importance of technical expertise in military effectiveness. Training programs across all branches began incorporating lessons about the value of diverse perspectives and the dangers of assumption-based leadership, using Maria's story as a compelling example of how individual excellence could challenge and change institutional cultures.
1 year after the incident that had changed both their lives, Maria received an unexpected phone call that would lead to the next chapter of her remarkable military career. The caller was Colonel Michael Stevens from the U.S. Army Sniper School at Fort Moore, Georgia, with an offer that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. "Sergeant First Class Vasquez," Colonel Stevens began, "I'm calling to offer you a position as Chief Instructor for Advanced Precision Marksmanship at the Army Sniper School. Your reputation and expertise have made you the unanimous choice of our selection committee." The position would make Maria one of the youngest soldiers ever to hold such a senior instructional role at the prestigious institution, and certainly one of the first women to serve as Chief Instructor in any combat-related specialty. The role would involve developing curriculum, training other instructors, and working with manufacturers to improve weapon systems and training equipment. Maria's initial response was characteristically measured. "Sir, I'm honored by the offer, but I want to make sure I understand the full scope of the responsibilities and that I'm truly the best candidate for the position." Colonel Stevens laughed. "Sergeant Vasquez, your 13 perfect shots are already legendary in marksmanship circles, but that's not why we want you. We want you because of how you've used that performance to improve training for everyone around you. Your students at Fort Benning are achieving performance levels we've never seen before, and your technical contributions to equipment development have impressed manufacturers and military personnel alike." As Maria considered this opportunity, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that morning on the firing range. What had started as a routine training exercise had evolved into a career-defining moment that opened doors she had never imagined possible. The 13 perfect shots had been impressive, but her professional response to the challenges that followed had proven even more valuable to her military career. The transition to Fort Moore represented more than just a career advancement. It was recognition that her expertise and leadership capabilities had matured to the point where she could influence military training at the highest levels. The Army Sniper School trained not just individual soldiers, but instructors who would go on to train others, multiplying the impact of any innovations or improvements she might contribute. General Hawthorne, when he learned of Maria's new assignment, sent her a congratulatory message that reflected on their shared experience. "Your new role is well-deserved recognition of exceptional capabilities that were evident long before our encounter on the firing range. I have no doubt that your influence on military training will benefit countless soldiers for years to come. The sniper school assignment also brought Maria into contact with international military communities in ways she had never experienced. NATO allies regularly sent their best marksmen to train at Fort Moore, and Maria found herself working with soldiers from British, Canadian, Australian, and European military units. These interactions provided opportunities to learn different approaches to marksmanship training and to share American innovations with Allied forces. One particularly memorable training session involved a group of Canadian Special Forces soldiers who had requested specific instruction on Barrett rifle systems. During the course of their training, they shared their own experiences with cold weather shooting and environmental challenges that were rare in Georgia but common in their operational areas. This exchange of expertise led to the development of new training modules that better prepared American soldiers for diverse environmental conditions. Maria's reputation also attracted attention from civilian law enforcement agencies who were beginning to adopt military-style precision shooting techniques for specialized situations. She was asked to consult with FBI and DEA training programs, helping to adapt military marksmanship principles for law enforcement applications where the stakes and constraints were different but equally demanding. The technical aspects of her new role proved just as challenging as the interpersonal elements. Maria was working directly with weapon manufacturers to provide feedback on equipment design and performance, drawing on her extensive experience with various rifle systems and her understanding of how different users interacted with complex equipment. Her input led to improvements in scope mounting systems, trigger mechanisms, and ergonomic features that made precision weapons more accessible to soldiers of different physical builds and experience levels. One of her most significant contributions involved redesigning the safety protocols for handling heavy precision rifles like the Barrett system. Working with a team of engineers and safety specialists, Maria developed new procedures that balanced the need for thorough equipment inspection with practical safety considerations. These protocols were eventually adopted across all military branches and significantly reduced training accidents involving specialized weapons. The influence of her original 13 perfect shots continued to resonate throughout the military community. New recruits arriving at sniper school often mentioned her performance as inspiration for their own military careers, and her shooting video had become one of the most watched training materials in the Army's digital library. But Maria was careful to emphasize that exceptional shooting was just one component of military effectiveness, and that consistency, adaptability, and professional judgment were equally important qualities for military success. Her teaching philosophy emphasized understanding over memorization, encouraging students to develop their own approaches to problem solving rather than simply copying techniques that worked for others. This approach produced students who were not only technically proficient, but also capable of adapting their skills to new situations and challenges they might encounter in their military careers. The success of her students became another measure of Maria's impact on military training. Soldiers who had trained under her direction were achieving exceptional performance in combat situations, advanced training programs, and competitive shooting events. Their success reflected not just individual capability, but the effectiveness of training methods that emphasized technical precision and tactical thinking. As her reputation grew, Maria was invited to speak at military conferences and training symposiums around the world. These speaking engagements allowed her to share her experiences and insights with military leaders from different countries and services, contributing to international cooperation and the sharing of best practices in military training.
2 years into her tenure as chief instructor, Maria faced a challenge that would test not just her technical expertise, but her leadership capabilities in ways she had never experienced. The Army was implementing a major overhaul of its marksmanship training programs, and Maria was selected to lead the development of new standards and procedures that would be used across all military branches. The project involved coordinating with multiple military services, each with their own traditions, preferences, and operational requirements. The Marines had their own proud tradition of marksmanship excellence, the Navy SEALs had specialized requirements for maritime operations, and the Air Force needed training that supported their unique mission profiles. Finding common ground among these different cultures and requirements would require diplomatic skills as well as technical expertise. Maria approached this challenge with the same methodical preparation that had characterized her shooting performance. She spent months visiting different training facilities, observing existing programs, and interviewing instructors and students to understand the strengths and weaknesses of current approaches. This research phase revealed significant variations in training quality and effectiveness across different bases and units. One particularly revealing discovery was that many training programs were still using equipment and techniques that had been developed decades earlier, despite significant advances in weapons technology and understanding of human performance factors. Maria realized that updating training standards would require not just new procedures, but also significant investment in equipment and instructor development. The political aspects of this project proved as complex as the technical challenges. Each service branch had senior officers who were protective of their existing programs and skeptical of changes proposed by outsiders. Maria found herself navigating carefully between the need for standardization and respect for institutional cultures that had developed over many years. General Hawthorne, who had become an advocate for evidence-based military training, proved to be a valuable ally in these discussions. His experience with Maria had given him credibility when arguing for the importance of technical expertise in training development, and his support helped overcome resistance from officers who might otherwise have dismissed proposals for significant changes. The new training standards that emerged from this process reflected Maria's philosophy of combining technical precision with practical adaptability. The standards established minimal performance requirements that all services would need to meet, while allowing flexibility in how those requirements were achieved. This approach respected the unique cultures and operational needs of different military units, while ensuring consistent quality across the entire military. Implementation of the new standards required training thousands of instructors across hundreds of military facilities. Maria developed a comprehensive instructor certification program that not only taught technical skills, but also emphasized the teaching methods that had proven effective in her own experience. This program became a model for professional development in other military specialties beyond marksmanship. The success of these initiatives brought Maria to the attention of Pentagon leadership, who were impressed not just by her technical contributions, but by her ability to manage complex projects involving multiple stakeholders with competing interests. She was invited to participate in strategic planning discussions about the future of military training and the role of technology in preparing soldiers for evolving threats. During one particularly significant meeting, Secretary of Defense Patricia Morrison asked Maria to assess how emerging technologies might affect military marksmanship training in the coming decades. Maria's response demonstrated the breadth of thinking that had made her such an effective leader. She discussed not just technological possibilities, but also the human factors that would determine how effectively new technologies could be integrated into military training. Technology can enhance human capability, but it cannot replace the fundamental skills of observation, judgment, and adaptability that define military effectiveness. Our training programs need to prepare soldiers to use advanced tools while maintaining the basic competencies that will serve them regardless of what equipment they are given. This perspective influenced broader discussions about military modernization and the balance between technological advancement and fundamental skill development. Maria's experience had taught her that the most sophisticated equipment was only as effective as the person using it, and that training programs needed to develop both technical proficiency and the judgment to apply that proficiency effectively.
The international attention that Maria's work was receiving also created opportunities for broader influence beyond the American military. NATO allies began requesting her input on their own training modernization efforts, and she was invited to participate in international conferences on military training and effectiveness. One particularly memorable engagement involved working with Norwegian forces who operated in Arctic conditions that presented unique challenges for precision shooting. The extreme cold affected both equipment performance and human capabilities in ways that required significant modifications to standard training approaches. Maria's collaboration with Norwegian instructors led to the development of specialized cold weather training modules that were subsequently adopted by American forces operating in similar environments. These international collaborations reinforced Maria's understanding that military effectiveness required constant learning and adaptation. Different environments, threats, and operational requirements demanded flexible approaches to training that could be modified based on specific circumstances while maintaining fundamental standards of performance and safety. The ripple effects of Maria's original 13 perfect shots continued to influence military culture in ways that extended far beyond marksmanship training. Her story had become a symbol of the importance of merit-based evaluation and the dangers of assumption-based leadership. Military leadership schools used her experience as a case study in recognizing and developing talent regardless of traditional expectations or biases.
5 years after the incident that had launched her into military prominence, Maria received a phone call that would represent the pinnacle of recognition for her contributions to military training and leadership. The caller was General Patricia Morrison, who had recently been appointed as the first female Secretary of Defense, with an offer that would make military history. "Sergeant First Class Vasquez," Secretary Morrison began, "I'm calling to offer you a direct commission as a second lieutenant and assignment to the Pentagon as a special advisor for training innovation. This position would make you one of the youngest officers ever to hold such a role, and your expertise would directly influence military training policy at the highest levels." The offer represented an extraordinary opportunity, but also a significant departure from the enlisted career path that Maria had followed throughout her military service. Direct commissions were rare and typically reserved for individuals with specialized expertise that couldn't be obtained through traditional military development programs. Accepting would mean leaving behind the NCO ranks where she had built her reputation and entering the officer corps with responsibilities she had never experienced. Maria requested time to consider the offer and spent several weeks consulting with mentors and colleagues about the implications of such a dramatic career change. Colonel Stevens, her commander at the sniper school, strongly encouraged her to accept, arguing that her influence on military training could be far greater from a Pentagon position than from even the most prestigious field assignment. General Hawthorne, when she sought his advice, provided perspective that helped clarify her decision. "Maria, you've already proven that exceptional performance can overcome traditional barriers and change institutional cultures. This opportunity would allow you to influence military training for thousands of soldiers rather than hundreds, and to help ensure that other talented individuals get opportunities to contribute their capabilities regardless of background or assumptions about their potential." After careful consideration, Maria accepted the commission and the Pentagon assignment. The transition from enlisted soldier to commissioned officer required adjustment not just to new responsibilities, but to a fundamentally different role within the military hierarchy. Instead of primarily training individual soldiers, she would now be developing policies and programs that would affect training across the entire military. Her first major project involved developing integration standards for new weapon systems that were being introduced across multiple military branches. The project required working with defense contractors, military engineers, and field commanders to ensure that new equipment could be effectively integrated into existing training programs without compromising safety or effectiveness. The technical complexity of this work was matched by its political sensitivity. Different military services had strong preferences for particular weapon systems and manufacturers, and Maria had to navigate these preferences while focusing on objective performance criteria and training requirements. Her reputation for technical competence and professional integrity proved invaluable in building trust among stakeholders who might otherwise have been suspicious of an officer with such an unconventional background. One of her most significant contributions involved developing standardized procedures for evaluating and adopting new training technologies.
Virtual reality systems, advanced simulation equipment, and computerized training aids were becoming increasingly sophisticated, but the military lacked consistent methods for determining which technologies provided genuine training value versus those that were merely impressive demonstrations. Maria's approach to this challenge reflected the analytical thinking that had made her such an effective marksman. She developed evaluation criteria that focused on measurable improvements in student performance rather than technological sophistication for its own sake. This approach helped the military make more cost-effective decisions about training technology investments and avoid the waste that often accompanied adoption of impressive but ineffective new systems. Her work also involved international coordination as NATO allies sought to standardize training approaches and share best practices. Maria found herself participating in meetings with military leaders from around the world, discussing how different countries approach training challenges and what lessons could be shared among allied forces. One particularly significant international project involved developing joint training standards for special operations forces from different countries. These elite units often work together in coalition operations, and differences in training approaches could create coordination challenges in high-stakes situations. Maria's role involved identifying common standards that could ensure interoperability while respecting the unique cultures and capabilities of different national forces. The influence of her original story continued to resonate throughout these high-level assignments. Military leaders who knew about her 13 perfect shots and her professional response to General Hawthorne's injury often mentioned how her example had influenced their own approaches to leadership and talent development. Her story had become part of military culture in ways that extended beyond the specific incident that had started it all. Maria's Pentagon assignment also provided opportunities to influence military policy in areas beyond training. She was asked to provide input on recruitment strategies, career development programs, and initiatives designed to improve military effectiveness through better utilization of diverse talents and perspectives. Her experience had given her unique insights into how institutional cultures could either support or hinder the development of military capability. The breadth of her responsibilities required Maria to develop new skills in areas like budget analysis, policy development, and legislative coordination. These were challenges quite different from marksmanship training, but she approached them with the same methodical preparation and attention to detail that had characterized her military career from the beginning. As she adapted to these new responsibilities, Maria remained connected to the field training community through regular visits to military bases and training facilities. These visits kept her grounded in the practical realities of military training and ensured that her policy recommendations were based on current understanding of what worked effectively in real training environments.
8 years after 13 perfect shots had changed the trajectory of her military career, Lieutenant Colonel Maria Vasquez stood before the largest gathering of military training professionals in the world. The International Military Training Symposium in Brussels had brought together over 2,000 participants from 47 countries, and Maria had been selected as the keynote speaker to discuss the future of military excellence in an era of rapid technological and social change. Her promotion to lieutenant colonel had come 2 years earlier, recognizing not just her contributions to training policy, but her broader influence on military culture and effectiveness. The speed of her advancement through the officer ranks was unprecedented for someone who had started as an enlisted soldier, but her unique combination of technical expertise, leadership capability, and institutional knowledge had made her invaluable to military leadership at the highest levels. As she looked out at the audience of generals, colonels, training specialists, and defense industry representatives, Maria reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. The nervous young staff sergeant who had arrived at Fort Benning for sniper training could never have imagined addressing such a distinguished international audience about military policy and training philosophy. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the confidence that came from years of speaking to military audiences around the world. 8 years ago, I thought that military excellence meant hitting 13 targets with 13 shots. I was right about the importance of precision and preparation, but I was wrong about thinking that individual performance was the ultimate measure of military effectiveness.
She went on to describe how her experience had taught her that true military excellence required not just individual capability, but the ability to develop and support exceptional performance in others. The 13 perfect shots had been impressive, but their real value had been in demonstrating what was possible and inspiring others to pursue their own highest levels of performance. Military effectiveness, Maria continued, depends on our ability to identify, develop, and utilize the full range of talents and capabilities within our forces. This requires leadership that looks beyond traditional assumptions and expectations to recognize excellence wherever it emerges. Her presentation included case studies from military units around the world that had achieved exceptional performance by creating cultures that valued merit over tradition, innovation over conformity, and collaborative problem-solving over rigid hierarchy. These examples illustrated practical applications of leadership principles that could be implemented by military leaders regardless of their specific operational environment. The audience was particularly interested in her discussion of how technological advancement was changing the requirements for military training. Maria argued that while new technologies offered remarkable capabilities, they also required more sophisticated training approaches that developed not just technical skills, but the judgment to use those capabilities effectively in complex, unpredictable situations. The soldier of the future will need to be comfortable with advanced technologies while maintaining the fundamental human capabilities of observation, analysis, and adaptation that have always defined military effectiveness. Our training programs must prepare soldiers to use sophisticated tools while developing the critical thinking skills that will serve them regardless of what equipment they're given. Following her presentation, Maria participated in panel discussions with military leaders from around the world, sharing insights about training innovation, leadership development, and cultural change within military institutions. These conversations reinforced her understanding that the challenges facing modern militaries were remarkably similar across different countries and cultures, and that international cooperation in training development could benefit everyone. One particularly meaningful moment came during a conversation with General Elizabeth Thompson from the British Army, who had followed a similar path from enlisted soldier to senior officer. "Your story has inspired military women around the world," General Thompson told Maria, "but more importantly, it's demonstrated that military effectiveness improves when we evaluate people based on their capabilities rather than our assumptions about their limitations." The symposium also provided opportunities for Maria to learn about innovative training approaches being developed by different countries. The Israeli military had developed remarkable simulation technologies for urban warfare training. The Swiss had created mountain warfare programs that could be adapted for other challenging environments. And the Australians had pioneered approaches to training that accounted for the vast distances and isolation that characterized their operational environment. These international exchanges continued to influence Maria's work back in Washington, where she was leading efforts to modernize American military training across all service branches. Her projects now involved coordinating with Congress on training budgets, working with defense contractors on equipment development, and collaborating with academic institutions on research into human performance and learning. The scope of her responsibilities had grown to include oversight of training programs that affected hundreds of thousands of military personnel, with budgets measured in billions of dollars and implications for military readiness that could affect national security. Yet she remained grounded in the practical understanding that had come from her years as an instructor working directly with individual soldiers. Maria's personal story had become inseparable from broader changes in military culture that emphasized merit-based advancement, respect for technical expertise, and the importance of diverse perspectives in solving complex problems. Military leadership schools now used her career as a case study in how individual excellence could influence institutional change and how effective leadership required the humility to recognize and learn from exceptional performance regardless of its source.
The Barrett rifle that had been at the center of her original story remained on display at Fort Benning, but its significance had evolved far beyond the 13 perfect shots that had made it famous. It had become a symbol of how individual moments of excellence could catalyze broader changes in institutional culture, and how the military's strength came from its ability to recognize and develop talent wherever it emerged.
10 years had passed since that scorching morning at Fort Benning when 13 perfect shots had set in motion a series of events that would transform not just Maria's career, but military culture itself. Colonel Maria Vasquez now held one of the most influential training positions in the Pentagon, but the story that had started with a Barrett rifle and a skeptical general had grown into something far more significant than anyone could have predicted. The military had changed dramatically during those 10 years, and Maria's influence could be seen in training programs, promotion policies, and leadership philosophies throughout all service branches. The principles she had championed, merit-based evaluation, respect for technical expertise, and the importance of recognizing excellence regardless of traditional expectations, had become integral parts of military doctrine and culture. General Hawthorne, now retired but serving as a senior consultant on military policy, remained one of Maria's most effective advocates. Their professional relationship had evolved into a powerful partnership for promoting cultural change within the military, with the general's willingness to acknowledge his initial biases, providing credible testimony for the importance of evidence-based leadership. Maria didn't just demonstrate exceptional shooting that day, General Hawthorne often told audiences at military conferences. She demonstrated the kind of professional excellence and character that the military needs to cultivate in all its personnel. My injury was unfortunate, but my education about the dangers of assumption-based leadership was invaluable. The ripple effects of their story continued to influence military policy at the highest levels. Secretary of Defense Morrison frequently cited Maria's career as an example of how the military could benefit from identifying and developing talent regardless of background or traditional career paths. The direct commission program that had brought Maria into the officer ranks had been expanded to bring other technical specialists into leadership positions where their expertise could have broader influence. Maria's work had also influenced civilian organizations beyond the military. Police departments, federal law enforcement agencies, and private security companies had adopted training principles developed from her methods. Business schools were teaching case studies based on her leadership approach, and international organizations were using her experience as a model for developing talent within their own institutional cultures. The technical innovations that had emerged from Maria's work continued to influence military training around the world. The safety protocols she had developed for handling specialized weapons had been adopted by NATO allies and were being used in military training programs on every continent. Her approach to evaluating new training technologies had saved military organizations millions of dollars by focusing investment on systems that provided genuine performance improvements rather than impressive but ineffective demonstrations. One of her most significant recent projects involved developing training standards for space-based military operations, a field that hadn't existed when she first picked up a Barrett rifle, but that now represented the future of military technology. The same analytical thinking and systematic approach that had made her an exceptional marksman proved equally valuable in developing training for operations in environments no human had ever experienced. The international recognition of Maria's contributions had grown to include honorary degrees from military academies around the world, speaking engagements at the most prestigious defense conferences, and consultation requests from governments seeking to modernize their own military training programs. Yet she remained grounded in the practical understanding that had come from her years working directly with individual soldiers. Young military personnel throughout the world now grew up knowing Maria's story as part of military culture.
Her 13 perfect shots had become legendary, but equally important was the example she had set for professional development, continuous learning, and the courage to challenge assumptions that limited military effectiveness. The Barrett rifle that had started it all remained on display at Fort Benning, but its context had evolved far beyond a simple demonstration of marksmanship skill. Visitors to the museum could see artifacts from Maria's entire career, training materials she had developed, equipment improvements she had influenced, and policy documents that bore her signature and reflected her influence on military doctrine. The museum display included testimonials from hundreds of soldiers whose careers had been influenced by training programs Maria had developed or policies she had championed. These testimonials illustrated how individual excellence could have exponential impact when it was used to improve systems and institutions rather than simply demonstrating personal capability. Perhaps most significantly, Maria's story had become a symbol of how military culture could evolve and improve while maintaining its core values of discipline, excellence, and service. She had demonstrated that challenging assumptions and embracing change could strengthen rather than weaken military effectiveness, and that the highest form of military service involved not just individual performance, but the development of others. As Colonel Vasquez continued her work at the Pentagon, developing policies that would affect military training for decades to come, she remained connected to the practical realities that had shaped her understanding of military effectiveness. Regular visits to training facilities, conversations with young soldiers, and participation in field exercises kept her grounded in the day-to-day challenges that military personnel faced. The young woman who had grown up shooting tin cans on a Montana ranch had become one of the most influential military leaders of her generation, but her approach remained rooted in the same values that had guided her throughout her career: precision, preparation, professionalism, and the continuous pursuit of excellence. The 13 perfect shots had been just the beginning of a story that was still being written, with each new chapter contributing to the ongoing evolution of military culture and effectiveness. The legacy of that morning at Fort Benning would continue to influence military training and leadership for generations to come, proving that individual moments of excellence, when combined with character and professional commitment, could create changes that extended far beyond their original context. Maria's story had become proof that the military's greatest strength lay not in its weapons or technology, but in its ability to recognize, develop, and utilize the full potential of the people who served. In the end, the Barrett rifle had just been a tool, and the 13 perfect shots had just been a demonstration. The real story was about how excellence, professionalism, and the courage to challenge assumptions could transform institutions and create opportunities for others to achieve their own highest levels of performance. It was a story that would continue to inspire military personnel around the world, reminding them that individual excellence, when properly applied, could have effects that lasted far beyond any single moment of achievement. Right up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.